Hello.
To you all.
How was Israel? How was Israel?
Well, Jonathan, anything you want to share about the Israel trip? Jonathan was on the trip with his family.
Yes, I can say a few things. One was memorable, amazing. Two is incredibly fun. And three is it's unbelievable that we all got COVID as soon as we left Israel.
Oh, no.
Yeah, actually, the timing did work out well.
We got it all in before we all got hit.
Yeah.
Did you all really get COVID after everyone who went?
I got it the day I hit Europe.
Wow.
I think every family, at least one person in every family was affected. But amazingly, there was only one person during the trip itself that got COVID and had to isolate. And everyone else, we just all got it at the end. So we were able to get through all the entire trip and this amazing B'nai Mitzvah ceremony with 17 young men and women on the top of the Mamilla Hotel, which is right outside the old city. So we're on the roof there, overlooking the walls of the old city, and they all chanted Torah. And then we had an amazing celebration and party with a DJ and a drummer and great food. It was wonderful. So
That's
fantastic.
How are you feeling now? Are we all right? Or?
Oh yeah, I think most people have now recovered. So that's a good thing. But yeah, it was a really wonderful trip. You know, going in a group is much different than just going on your own. And there are pros and cons to both, but this was an incredible group, drama averse, and we had great guides who were really knowledgeable, and that makes a huge difference to really be able to go to these places and hear the stories and the history, and to hear it from people who are knowledgeable and passionate. That's something that you don't necessarily get when you go travel on your own somewhere. You might have a day guide, but to have someone who's with you for the entirety and to get to know you and the group. And so it was really phenomenal. It was great. And I got to take my family, and that was the first time for two of my girls to be in Israel, and they got to bond, like Jonathan's daughters and my girls connected. So, it's nice that all these people who are all connected to Wilshire, but don't necessarily know each other leading up to the trip, have the opportunity to really bond and see our homeland. So it was great. So it's nice to be with all of you. I hope all of you are doing well, and safe and healthy. So we're going to really just dive into this fascinating Torah portion. And so before we do that, of course, we are going to, we are just going to begin with the blessing for engaging in the study of Torah. So Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Praise are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, who commands us to engage in the study of Torah. Okay, so last week was a really exciting Torah portion. Also, last week, Chukat was the Torah portion that we have where Moses learns that he's never going to be able to enter the land of Israel. So that was a big moving story. And I think one of the things that I always take away from that story is the fact that even though Moses learns he's never going to be able to enter the land, he does not give up on leading the people. He continues to lead them to the edge of the promised land. So even though his own goals will not be reached, he has the larger picture and the larger group in mind, which I think is a really important point. So I don't know what you guys talked about last week with that. But now all of a sudden we move into a story that is completely unrelated to Moses and really has no characters in it that are famous from a Jewish perspective. The main characters in this Torah portion, named Balak, and he was the king of the Moabites, really have to do with Balak, the king of the Moabites, and this guy Bil'am, who is a seer or a mystic or a prophet, depends on however you want to see his role. These two main characters take up the majority of the Torah portion until the very end, and I don't know if we'll get to the very end today, but really seems to be completely disconnected from the rest of the narrative. It's only connected in the sense that leading up to the start of this Torah portion, we know that the Israelites are traveling to the edge of the land of Moab. And then at the very end, there's a reference to them being at the edge of the land of Moab. But other than that, this really is a story about this king who wants to overthrow and destroy the Jewish people, and this man that he hires named Bilam, who is hired by him to curse the Israelites, but instead he doesn't do that. So what I want to do today, instead of focusing, as I usually like to bring in some rabbinic commentary, really just to look at the text itself, and then for us to bring our own commentary into the different pieces as we move through the story. Okay, so first we're going to meet Bilam and Balak. Then there's this fascinating, the only time besides the snake in the story of Genesis, in the very, very beginning of the Torah, this is the only other place where we have a talking animal. And it always, think of Shrek. If you've seen the movie Shrek, the talking donkey, I can only imagine that there was some Jew who read this Torah portion and felt like, okay, we're going to find a talking donkey and incorporate that into a Disney movie. I think it was Disney. Was it Disney? Maybe it's not. Maybe it's not. Whatever. Anyway, okay, moving on. Here we go. And of course, if you have questions, raise them as we go through. All right. So now we begin at the beginning of this Torah portion, completely unrelated to what came before in Chukat. Balak, son of Tzipor, saw all that Israel had done to the Amorites. Moab was alarmed because that people was so numerous, and Moab dreaded the Israelites. And Moab said to the elders of Midian, now this horde will lick clean all that is about us, as an ox licks up the grass of the field. Balak, son of Tzipor, who was king of Moab at the time, sent messengers to Bilam, son of Beor, in Petor, which is by the Euphrates, in the land of his kinfolk, to invite him, saying, there is a people that came out of Egypt. It hides the earth from view, and it is settled next to me. Come then, put a curse upon this people for me, since they are too numerous for me. Perhaps I can thus defeat them and drive them out of the land, for I know that whomever you bless is blessed indeed, and whomever you curse is cursed. So first of all, there is some parallelism between what Balak is talking about, and if you think about Pharaoh back in the very beginning of the book of Exodus, one of the things that we've learned about Pharaoh in the very beginning is that he is fearful that the Israelites are going to become a people so numerous that they're going to take over the land. And that's why he then enslaves the Jewish people. And here again, we have this parallel as we see throughout the Torah and as we have learned throughout our history, people believing that we are somehow going to overtake the world and rule it and destroy everything else in its path. Right, so that as an ox licks up the grass of the field, right? So that the Israelites are going to lick clean the entire world and this entire land, and Balak doesn't want to deal with that. So instead of dealing with him with his own army, he decides to go a different route, and he goes to hire this guy Bilam. We don't know much about Bilam's past at all, other than clearly he's famous. Because Balak knows to reach out to him. And Balak sends some people to go and talk to Bilam and say, look, there are these people that came out of Egypt. I know that whatever you bless is blessed and whomever you curse is cursed. By the way, this is another reference that we find from earlier in the Torah does anyone know who God speaks to when there's language associated with whom you will be blessed and whoever curses you will be cursed? Goes back to Genesis. The first Jew, Abraham, when God is offering a blessing to Abraham, part of that is this idea that those who are blessed by you will be blessed, and those who try and curse you will be cursed. Right. So here we have some parallel here where it's as if Balak is trying to reach out to someone who is godlike and who has this power most of the time, either to bless or, in this case, really wants him to curse the Israelite people. So the elders of Moab and the elders of Midian, versed in divination, set out. And they came to Bilam and gave him Balak's message. He said to them, spend the night here, and I shall reply to you as Adonai may instruct me. So the Moabite dignitary stayed with Bilam, and God came to Bilam and said, what do these men want of you? And Bilam said to God, Balak, son of Tzipor, king of Moab, sent me this message. Here is a people that came out of Egypt and hides the earth from view. Come now and curse them for me. Perhaps I can engage them in battle and drive them off. But God said to Bilam, do not go with them. You must not curse that people, for they are blessed. Okay, so we as we're going through this, I want you to think about what kind of character is Bilam. I'll just say off the bat that the rabbis see Bilam not as a positive character at all, that he is seen as a person who is an enemy of the Jewish people, even though we'll see something interesting that comes with his blessing to the Jewish people later on in the story. But here, it seems like Bilam already does have a relationship with God. In some way, God speaks directly to him and says, in this case, in the very beginning, don't go. Do not go to try and curse the Jewish people because they are a blessed people. Okay, so that's what happens on night one. Bilam had told the messengers, wait, let me talk to God, see what God wants. See if God wants me to come and curse the people or bless them. Okay, so the next morning, Bilam arose in the morning and said to Balak's dignitaries, go back to your country, for Adonai will not let me go with you. The Moabite dignitaries left, and they came to Balak and said, Bilam refused to come with us. Then Balak sent other dignitaries, more numerous and distinguished than the first. They came to Bilam and said to him, thus says Balak, son of Tzipor, please do not refuse to come to me. I will reward you richly, and I will do anything you ask of me. Only come and damn this people for me. Okay, so now we're learning Balak is pretty serious about hiring Bilam, and he clearly needs this done, and he's willing to do anything. He's willing to reward him richly. He will do anything he asks. In other words, the leader is becoming almost the follower, right? The king of this land is giving over all power to Bilam. And this is where the rabbis believe that this kind of all goes to Bilam's head. So instead of him being humble, that this is really a sign that Bilam now has the opportunity to take advantage of Balak because he has the upper hand. Balak's willing to do anything. Bilam replied to Balak's officials, though Balak were to give me his house full of silver and gold, I could not do anything, big or little, contrary to the command of my God. Okay, Adonai. So a few things. First, he says, my God, which it is not. He's not an Israelite, but he's now declaring that he has some kind of relationship with God. And according to this line, give me his house full of silver and gold, the rabbis tend to take this as this is Bilam's hint that he wants to be rewarded generously, but that he just needs to sit back and wait because he's saying that he's not going to go with them. But he says to them right after this, so you two stay here overnight and let me find out what else Adonai may say to me, right? So he's still giving a little bit of room where maybe God will change God's mind. There is, in one of the commentaries I read, this idea that in ancient time that for divinations and for dreams, it wasn't enough for a dream to only come to someone one time. In order for it to be clearly defined and supported, you had to have the same dream twice. So in this case, Bilam had one night where God said, don't go, don't curse the people, right? That's what happened up above right here. And so now he has to wait one more night. Is the dream that he had or his connection to God going to be affirmed in the second night, right? So it's almost like he's waiting to see, is God going to change God's mind? Is he leaving an opening for these people to believe that maybe he's going to do what they want him to do? Again, we don't know too much about Bilam and his character, but the rabbis are already saying he's a negative character. Okay, that night, God came to Bilam and said to him, if the agents have come to invite you, you may go with them, but whatever I command you, that you shall do. Now, this is interesting because now all of a sudden God is telling Bilam that he can go. But the night before, he told him, don't go. So according to our tradition, this is really a moment that, again, if we go back to Genesis, in the very, very beginning of Genesis, Adam and Eve, there's a really important concept that comes from the story of Adam and Eve, that idea of free will. And here, the rabbis seem to be suggesting what God is doing is reminding Bilam that he has free will. Right? You may go with them. He's not saying he needs to go with them, but this is yet another example that our tradition puts free will front and center. We are not puppets, and God is not the puppet master, that there is a sense that even when we are put in positions throughout our lives, as we know this, where we have agency, and we have the ability to decide what we want to do. And at the end of the day, the consequences are ours to handle. So here, this suggestion seems to be, all right, I've already told you, Bilam, last night that you shouldn't go because you should not try and curse these people because they are a blessed people. Now, second night, they've come back. Okay, well, it's up to you. What are you going to do, right? It's kind of like if I think about parenting, right? Those moments where you want to try and tell your child, don't do this. I've already told you not to do this. And at the same time, or when they're going to make a decision that you probably assume will not be the best decision for them. And at the same time, at some point, you just need to say, okay, well, look, I've told you how I feel. You know where I stand. But at the end of the day, it's going to be up to you, right? So it seems like that's what's going on here. God is giving him the agency to make a decision, and Bilam's going to have to decide, even though God had already told him, don't go, don't even try and curse these people, for they are blessed. Is Bilam going to do it or not? So when he arose in the morning, Bilam saddled his ass and departed with the Moabite dignitaries. Right? This is also interesting because he doesn't then go into some negotiation with the officials. He actually has no interaction with the officials in the morning at all. He just gets right up, saddles his own ass, and departs with the Moabite dignitaries. Right? So it's as if he really isn't hesitating at all. And again, he is going under the assumption of these Moabite dignitaries that he is going to curse the Israelite people. Right? So this is, again, where the rabbis feel that Bilam is not a character that we should look up to. Because if he knows that he is, number one, not going to be able to do anything other than what God tells him to do, right? He is almost going to be controlled. His voice is going to be controlled by God. God has already told him that. And yet he's misleading both the Moabite dignitaries by going with them because they assume he's now okay to go and curse them. And by going and agreeing to curse them, which means he's probably going to attempt maybe to curse them, then he's going against God as well. Because God already told him, don't go and don't even try and curse the Jewish people. Okay. But regardless, now we're seeing that Bilam is a flawed character, and he saddles his own ass and he departs with the Moabite dignitaries. Let me just pause there. Any questions? Because I know I'm doing a lot of the talking. Yes, Susan. And then Brad.
I'm trying to unmute. As a meta question, I've always wondered about Balaam. Who is he? He comes from the old country by the Euphrates, where the ancestors came. He's not an Israelite, but he speaks to an Israelite God. So what's the deal here?
Well, that's a great question. We don't know much about him other than this is his main story, and the only story really about him.
Right.
And so there are a few examples where there are non-Jews who have a connection, non-Israelites who have a connection to
I'm
God.
thinking Job.
Yeah.
Later.
Yep. And yet, unlike the prophets, this is where Bilam isn't necessarily considered a prophet per se, also because of the fact that he is sent to curse the Israelite people, not to try and save them, not to try and get them to repent, not to try and bring order to the world, but otherwise instead to actually bring chaos. But it's a weird, this again, as I said at the very beginning, is a part of the Torah that is really disconnected from everything else. Some of the rabbis have a rabbinic tradition that Moses wrote all of the Torah, but they specifically say, and Nechama Leibowitz, who's a modern commentator, really believes that this is Moses writing the story and that it's included, and the rabbis come up with this idea that it's included because it's really a way for Moses to also work through his own psychology and basically his own life, because there are a lot of parallels about the use of language and this journey, and so there's some interesting weird things that the rabbis try to do to connect this more so to Moses and to the Jewish people than what we really do find in the Torah portion itself, which it seems to be completely disconnected whatsoever. So I don't have a better answer for you other than it's this weird part, and most of the modern commentaries see this as this weird piece of the story that's separated from everything else.
So it's kind of like an Aesop's fable, but having the guy, Aesop's use animals, but there are some animals here, but that it's a fable that's inserted to illustrate a point.
Yes.
Yeah, can I share what my point is?
Well, hold on one second, Donna. First Brad, and then.
Okay,
Rabbi, do you think it's significant that God appears at night to Balaam twice? Is there some implication possibly that this is through a dream, that it's a dream experience and therefore somewhat unreliable?
Yeah, so that's as I was mentioning, the idea that in the ancient world, this idea of a dream having to come more than once in order for it to be solidified as legitimate, right? So yes, at night, and if you think about a lot of the moments where there's connection between God and people in the Torah, many of them both happen in the wilderness and they happen at night, right? And this blending between dream and talking to God, and so yes, I mean, I'm sure there is some significance, but again, it's also trying to blur this line between, is this guy legitimate or not, right? Is it just a dream? Is he coming up with it, or is he really connected to God? And is he on God's side, or is he just being controlled by God for a lesson to be taught to him, to Balak, and then a meta lesson for the Torah itself to, those who try and curse the Jewish people are not going to be able to be successful in that venture. Okay, Donna.
I was just thinking, I think it's very beautiful in the Torah that this idiot is riding on an ass.
Yes.
You look at the way it's presenting God is so wise. And then thinking, actually contemplating the thought of cursing our people, and he's riding on an ass. So go figure, right?
Yep. Okay, so let's, any other questions or comments so far? All right, Jerry.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm noticing something interesting between verse 20 and 22. On one reading, as we were talking about, which is based on the translation that you were using, which I think is Safaria's, Kum, it's saying that you may rise up and go. And then in verse 22, God was angry that he went. But the other reading is that Kum can also be the imperative, that because the messengers came for Balaam, they have to go. And then God was upset basically in 22 that he had to go. So in other words, I'm wondering if, I see the two options. One is that it's free will, that he had the choice to go or not, and God was upset that he went. The other seems to be that imperative instruction that he should go, and then God was upset that he had to go based on being summoned by them. Do you have thoughts on that? Maybe.
Yeah, I guess my thought would be that based on what happened on day one, where he wasn't required to go with them, and he kind of has the upper hand in the sense that Balak is really relying on him, and has basically said, I'll give you anything you want. I don't read it as Balaam is being forced on this next day to have to leave. If anything, he has the power to negotiate or to say, this is what I want, he doesn't even interact with them. And he saddles his ass himself, this idea that he takes the initiative right away in this desire to go, to me means that it's not about him being forced to do it by other people, but that it's his desire to do that.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah, you have a lot of good commentaries and books behind you. So,
well, in fact, it is a digital background, so I have some of them, but this is all a picture.
Oh, is it a digital background? I was like, that's a serious great library. Yeah, it's wonderful. Okay,
I mean, it's busted on the digital background.
Merle.
If we're given, or if then, but now too, if we're given free will, and we make the decision, and the decision goes bad, Is God making that decision, or is it just human nature that's making the decision that it's not a good decision?
Well, this comes up in Pirkei Avot. There's a passage in Pirkei Avot that says free will is given, but God knows everything, and everything is already determined. So in a way, it's this idea that yes, we have free will, but maybe God already knows all the things that are going to happen. It's just that God is not necessarily intervening and deciding what's going to happen. It's as though God knows all pathways, and we're going to decide which one we want to go on, or God already knows what we're going to decide. But that still leaves room potentially for us to have the free will to make the decision, because God's not forcing us to make one decision or another. It's just that God is all knowing, right? So it goes back to this complicated idea. Can God be all knowing and all powerful? Is God all knowing and all powerful? And if so, how do we understand the role of free will, right? So it's a much more complicated, up at night, let's try and figure this out for ourselves kind of thing. But yes, so I still think the free will here, but you can still potentially be punished either by God, or in this case, or by others for the choice you make.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. Donna.
I was just going to say, this is a good example. If you're ever going to go be with any dignitaries, you better speak up for Israel. I mean, everybody needs the countries, I heard the countries that are against Israel, their economy is going to pot. So, I mean, it's a good thing in the universe that we stand by Israel always. And for those who don't, oh well.
Yeah, and that goes to the meta idea that, again, maybe this is included based on what we're going to hear Bilam say in his blessings instead of curses. And then actually at the very end, he does offer some curses, that this is a warning to other groups of people. Yeah. And supposed to be potentially a warning to the Jewish people about what could happen if they don't follow God. So both of those come into play. All right, continuing along. So now we have the talking animal part of the story. So he saddles his donkey, departs with the Moabite dignitaries, but God was incensed at his going. So a messenger of God took a position in his way as an adversary. He was riding on his she-ass with his two servants alongside, when the ass caught sight of the messenger of Adonai standing in the way. Some translations just read as an angel, with his drawn sword in his hand, right? So there's this angel that Bilam, for some reason, can't see, even though Bilam has already declared and seems to be able to, and I think there's a reference up here. Maybe not, or maybe it's later on, where Bilam, for some reason, can't see this angel, but the donkey can, right? And it's this angel that's standing right in the road with a sword in its hand. And the ass swerved from the road and went into the fields, and Bilam beat the ass to turn her back onto the road. And the messenger of Adonai then stationed himself in a lane between the vineyards with a fence on either side. Right, so now it's the second time where now the angel has put itself in a way where there's even less room for the donkey to go. The ass, seeing the messenger of Adonai, pressed herself against the wall and squeezed Bilam's foot against the wall. So he beat her again. Once more, the messenger of God moved forward and stationed himself on a spot so narrow that there was no room to swerve right or left. And when the ass now saw the messenger of God, Adonai, she lay down under Bilam, and Bilam was furious and beat the ass with his stick. Then Adonai opened the ass's mouth, and she said to Bilam, "What have I done to you that you have beaten me these 3 times?" Bilam said to the ass, "You have made a mockery of me. If I had a sword with me, I'd kill you." The ass said to Bilam, "Look, I am the ass that you have been riding all along until this day. Have I been in the habit of doing this to you?" And he answered, "No." Then Adonai uncovered Bilam's eyes, and he saw the messenger of God standing in the way, his drawn sword in his hand. Thereupon he bowed right down to the ground. The messenger of Adonai said to him, "Why have you beaten your ass these 3 times? It is I who came out as an adversary, for the errand is obnoxious to me. And when the ass saw me, she shied away because of me those 3 times. If she had not shied away from me, you are the one I should have killed, while sparing her." Balaam said to the messenger of God, I erred because I did not know that you were standing in my way. If you still disapprove, I will turn back. But the messenger of Adonai said to Balaam, go with the men, but you must say nothing except what I tell you. So Balaam went along with Balak's dignitaries. I'm gonna pause there. What the heck is going on in this story, and why is it included? What are your thoughts? Yeah, Lorraine.
Questions related to our previous discussion about free will. So Balaam left, and God was incensed that he left. It could have been for different reasons, but he left and God was incensed. There's a messenger that comes in, and the messenger said to him that he would have killed him if the ass wouldn't have backed away. So that already kind of takes away the free will piece of the equation, because why would the angel have killed him if he had the free will to go? Instead, the angel confirmed what he said, that you're going to speak actually what God wants you to speak. So that's also kind of not very free willish in a sense. So I just wanted to know, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It seems to be contradictory to this idea of free will. And at the same time, the angel could have just killed Balaam right away, right? So I always see these things. And again, there's a lot of this 3 times throughout this Torah portion. That is a common theme. There's a lot of 3s. So it's almost as though there are multiple opportunities given. The way I see it is free will. When we make choices, there are consequences, and they build off one another. The way I like to read this is that Balaam's actions when the donkey first moves, he beats it. This is according to some sources where Balaam's anger really comes out, where we see his true nature, right? The way he treats the animal, the way in which he is blinded to what he should be able to see, right? He's so focused, but we don't know on what, but he's not focused on the right thing, that he doesn't see this angel, and instead is focused on beating the animal and trying to overpower this beast. And as a result, in the end, it's the beast that overpowers him. And he actually becomes the weaker character here, because he's the one who has to respond to the animal and then it's so yes, it seems to be contradictory, and yet I still believe that each of those acts, the 3 times that he's beating the donkey, is supposed to remind us that of the consequences of our actions. And then finally, he is given, he says, I'll turn back if you want, but he's still given the chance to move forward with the decision that he wants to do. It's not like, and he could have said, you know what, this is a clear sign, I shouldn't move forward. And yet, again, this is why the rabbis believe he's not the greatest of characters. Again, he is given a sign, but almost directly by God, that he shouldn't be doing this, and yet he decides to move forward anyway. So his desire to curse, his desire to have this power that Balak is giving him, overrides any other, good decision that he should be making. Jerry, then Susan, then Ben, and then Doc.
So yes, I agree with what you're saying. And I think it's interesting that the instruction from the angel in this case says go. It doesn't say you may choose or gives him a choice. It's actually an instruction to go. So to me, this is more of a warning about what to do when you are there. So to me, it seems like there is approval to go, but an extremely strong warning to follow God's instructions when there.
Yeah, great. Yes, thanks, Jerry. Susan.
I just would reiterate what you're saying. Rabbi Mel Gottlieb wrote this morning in the Parshat and said that the greed was so powerful, it overcame everything. And I would just add to that, it overcame, it was his objective, overcame his ability to see the angel with the fiery sword, which isn't that similar to this cherubim who guard the gate to the Garden of Eden. That's how it's depicted, an angel with the sword in the Michelangelo fresco. So there's something that's a reiterative thing there too. And I think it's a warning to other people when lust and greed and some, takes over us, we don't see things and we can't see the right way to go. So I'm thinking that as a kind of metaphor parable.
Yes, thank you, Susan. Benjamin.
Thank you, Rabbi. Kind of agreeing with Jerry and Susan, but another thought where, and I know you said the commentary paints Balaam out to be a bad guy, so and I don't want to, disagree, but just another thought that, we all agree beating animals is bad, so that's not a good thing. Maybe at the time, it's a little more acceptable to use that as a metaphor for something. But at the beginning, it's, you can't go, and then if you want to go, you may go, and then he goes on the trip. But now he's like saying to him, well, you can go, but you have to do exactly as I tell you. So it seems almost like he's being set up for success or set up for some special important mission to say something that has important meaning. And this is coming from God. So maybe he's not such a bad guy. He's being set up, I don't know the ending of the story, but being set up for something big.
Yeah, no, you're right. And a lot of times if you read it without the rabbinic commentary, Balaam doesn't seem to be such a terrible guy. I mean, he beating the donkey is not great, but he does seem to be following, he's going to have to follow what God says, and we're going to see that happen soon. So, what makes him so bad, especially because of the blessing that he's going to offer also later. So you're not alone in thinking that he may not be as awful as some of our rabbinic commentators believe he is. Donna.
Reading this passage, it reminds me a lot of Jonah, the story of Jonah. And it seems like there's a constant theme in the Torah and in the Bible overall about how not to be a prophet. What does a prophet not do? And how can you tell the difference between a real prophet and a fake prophet? And I'm wondering, when the basically editors of the Tanakh put it together, was there something going on historically, like there were a lot of false prophets around? I'm wondering if they stuck these stories in as sort of a cautionary tale, like don't believe all these guys necessarily that are around you.
Yeah, there are lots of references to false prophets and fear of that. And actually the story that comes at the very end of this Torah portion, which we probably won't get to, is also kind of a warning about the power of other traditions and other gods and falling into kind of the traps of what could be very appealing by other gods and godlike worship. So it may be connected. This may be connected to really the warning of kind of leading into what happens at the very end of this Torah portion, which is the precursor to next week's Torah portion. This idea of Pinchas, this character of Pinchas. So and that story, which is really about zealotry, which is about such a firm belief that according to the story seems to be a positive thing at the very end of the story of Pinchas. That zealotry and firm belief is necessary sometimes in order for us to not succumb to the temptations of other societies and gods.
There's something very funny about the style. The style is similar. Like, let's have, animals are involved and these kind of like wacky things are happening.
Yeah.
And it's not like the rest of a lot of other passages. It's interesting how similar they are.
Yeah, you're right. Thanks for making that connection. Brad.
Yeah, I actually thought of a different episode in the Torah, and I thought of Jacob wrestling with the angels as Balaam is wrestling with this donkey. And I think it's significant that, yes, there are 3 episodes, but each time in each episode, if I'm not mistaken, doesn't the road get narrower? And so Balaam is persisting in his will. There's a willful type of ignorance going on here, as opposed to Jacob, who wrestles, but then does have an awakening.
Yeah, great. I don't think we can ignore also what I think this may be teaching us about our connection to the animal world, right? That there are certain things that the animal world and natural world has a perspective on that we as humans don't necessarily have, right? So I also like to read this as a reminder of let's not ignore signs from the natural world that are either warning signs to us or ways in which we can potentially start to see the world in a way that's not just through the human lens, that there are other lenses through which the world exists. And the donkey is able to see something that Bilam is not, and is able, and then tries to warn Bilam, and is a trusting animal, right? When the donkey speaks, it says, look, I've been your trusty donkey for a long time. Have I ever done anything like this? Right. So Bilam's inability to, again, whether you want to see this as a connection to animals or to other people, to not trust in a system that has been trusting for so long, here he is ignoring the signs of the world around him, and especially the natural world. And so to me, it's another warning that the Torah is kind of telling us, like, do not ignore what we can learn from the animal world and from the natural world, because it can teach us a lot. Okay, I want to keep moving along so that we can see what happens next. Okay, so after this funky conversation that he has with the donkey, Balak, okay, he went out to meet, okay, when Balak heard that Bilam was coming, he went out to meet him at Ir Moab, which is on the Arnon border at its farthest point. And Balak said to Bilam, when I first sent to invite you, why didn't you come to me? Am I really unable to reward you? But Bilam said to Balak, and now that I have come to you, have I the power to speak freely? I can utter only the word that God puts into my mouth. Okay, so I'm pausing there. This is just, again, I made a reference to this idea of anger when we think about midot, which are these ideas of Jewish values that we should live by or we should be warned of. Rabbi Nickerson says we can identify the midah of ka'as, of anger, in the actions and reactions of Bilam, God, and the donkey. Our sages equated anger with the cardinal sin of idolatry. When anger flares up in our heart, there is no place for God. If we are required to sacrifice our lives to avoid idol worship, how much more so are we required to rein in our ego and control our tempers to avoid anger? One who is angry does not even consider the divine presence important, right? So if you were to read this story through the lens of our emotional state and how we are supposed to interact with each other, that this is a story, especially this one about Bilam and the donkey, is one warning us about the negative ramifications of anger, and how that can blind us. And in this case, when it flares up, it leaves no place for us to connect to the holy. Okay, so moving on. And now I'm skipping a bunch because we go from 21. Chapter 22, verse 38. Now we're going to chapter 23, verse 27. So what happens in between is Balak takes Bilam to a place to oversee part of the Israelite camp, not the whole camp of the Israelite people, but part of it. And Bilam, of course, doesn't offer a curse and instead offers what is kind of like a blessing-ish, not the most powerful of them. And then Balak gets upset and says, I brought you here to curse them. Why are you not cursing them? And why are you blessing them instead? So he takes him to another top of a hill. Again, this is going back to the threes, right? And so he takes him to another hill where he sees another part of the Israelite encampment, and he offers, again, a second blessing instead of a curse. And then Balak gets upset again. And that's where we're now taking over again, coming back to the story. Okay. Then Balak said to Bilam, come now, I will take you to another place. Perhaps God will deem it right that you damn them for me there. Right. So Balak still isn't giving up, even though now Bilam twice has blessed instead of cursed. Balak is so determined that he's willing to try again. So Balak took Bilam to the peak of Peor, which overlooks the wasteland, right? The wasteland or the wilderness. And Bilam said to Balak, build me here 7 altars and have 7 bulls and 7 rams ready for me here. And Balak did as Bilam said. He offered up a bull and a ram on each altar. And now Bilam, seeing that it pleased Adonai to bless Israel, did not, as on previous occasions, go in search of omens, but turned his face toward the wilderness. And as Bilam looked up and saw Israel encamped tribe by tribe, the Spirit of God came upon him. Right? So this is slightly different than what happens in the first two instances where Bilam blesses instead of curses. First, now he sees the entirety of the Jewish people and their entire encampment. He also, it's the rabbis key in on this idea. If he turned his face toward the wilderness, either as a sign he was looking away. There are different interpretations, but if you think about all of Bamidbar with the book of Numbers, right? Bamidbar means in the wilderness, right? He's now really looking into the place. And as I mentioned before, when Brad had brought something up, this idea of the wilderness and in the wilderness and at night, the spiritual nature of what it means to be in the wilderness, right? That the majority of the Jewish story takes place in the wilderness, right? The way in which we connect to God, where we find ourselves, is in the wilderness. And so Bilam finally really almost he kind of accepts this idea of really taking in the grandiosity and the importance of this location, and the Spirit of God came upon him. Right, so it's almost like now this blessing is going to be slightly different from the other two that we had before. And taking up his theme, he said, "Word of Bilam, son of Beor, word of the man whose eye is true, word of one who hears God's speech, who beholds visions from the Almighty, prostrate but with eyes unveiled. How fair are your tents, O Jacob, your dwellings, O Israel, like palm groves that stretch out, like gardens beside a river, like aloes planted by Adonai, like cedars beside the water. Their boughs drip with moisture, their roots have abundant water. Their ruler shall rise above Agag, their sovereignty shall be exalted. God, who freed them from Egypt, is for them like the horns of the wild ox. They shall devour enemy nations, crush their bones, and smash their arrows. They crouch, they lie down like a lioness who dares rouse them. Blessed are they who bless you, accursed they who curse you." And enraged at Bilam, Balak struck his hands together. "I called you," Balak said to Bilam, "to damn my enemies, and instead you have blessed them these 3 times. Back with you at once to your own place. I was going to reward you richly, but Adonai has denied you the reward." Bilam replied to Balak, "But I even told the messengers you sent to me, though Balak were to give me his house full of silver and gold, I could not of my own accord do anything good or bad contrary to Adonai's command. What Adonai says, that I must say." Okay, so this is his final blessing that he does on the third mountain before he's then, Balak finally gets fed up with it and says, "No, I'm not giving you anything, get out of here." And this is a really important one because this line right here, verse 5, is part of our morning, is the beginning of a prayer that we offer every time we go to the synagogue in the morning. So tomorrow morning at Shabbat, for example, when I'm doing this bar mitzvah with Cantor Shapiro, one of the opening songs is Ma Tovu Ohalecha Yaakov. So if you look here, this is the translation. I don't have the Hebrew. I didn't want to bring the Hebrew for it, but Ma Tovu Ohalecha Yaakov Mishkanotecha Yisrael. That's the first line. So this is the line that we offer in our prayer this is the prayer that we're supposed to offer when we enter the sanctuary. When we enter any sanctuary for prayer on a morning service, this we say both the first line is from Bilam, from this week's Torah portion, and then the prayer goes on to say, "As for me, through your abundant kindness, I will enter your house. I will prostrate myself toward your holy sanctuary in awe of you, Adonai. I love the dwelling, your house, and the place where your glory resides. I will prostrate myself and bow. I will kneel before Adonai, my maker. May my prayer to you, Adonai, be at a favorable time. God, in the abundance of your kindness, answer me with the truth of your deliverance." Right? So here, really incredibly, the prayer that we offer when we enter a sanctuary every morning was a blessing that was offered by this person who came to try and curse us and instead blessed us. And now that is the beginning of a prayer that we offer every time we go into the sanctuary. So why do you think that is? Why would our tradition choose to take the line from this blessing that was supposed to be a curse, this idea of of Bilam. Just I'll put it up one more time so you see it. This idea that he is looking out at the tents and he says, how beautiful, how wonderful are your tents, your dwelling places, O Israel. And then he goes on to talk about their power and their ability to overthrow anyone who comes in their way. Why would the rabbis decide to take that line and then build a prayer around it that we're supposed to offer every single time we go into the sanctuary? Merle and then Susan.
I think it's that he finally realizes the appreciation of what has been, probably not the right word, accomplished, but realizing what these people have been through and what they've provided for themselves. Right. And I also wanted to say, when you talked about, don't ignore animals or the nature around us, that's why people have help dogs. That, there are people who, need medication, whether they're diabetic or heart or whatever. They have help dogs, and the dogs remind them to take, when they're having a problem, the dogs are there to remind them. So
Right.
that could be what this donkey, if dogs could talk, instead they nudge you or they bark or whatever.
Right. Yeah.
That's their way of communicating.
Yeah. Thanks, Merle.
That's
Susan
beautiful.
and then Donna.
I was just going to say, God turned a blessing. I mean, I intended to be a curse into a blessing, change of heart, that it's always possible to change the king's heart. Everybody's heart can be changed through blessings and having a change of heart. God can give favor and people can change their hearts and their minds. It's not impossible.
Great. So that every time we enter the sanctuary in the morning, according to Donna's interpretation, is our opportunity to change, right? Or to move into a different space than our mindset was before we entered into the sanctuary, right? This is a time in which we can shift perspectives and also where we have permission and the opportunity to do tshuva, right? We're not supposed to just wait for the high holidays to bring about change, but every single day is an opportunity to make change. And again, linked back to this idea of free will, right? We have the opportunity every day. Great, Susan.
Yes, just adding on to Merle, it's not only the help that the dogs have for people there. I mean, they're used, police departments to track down criminals. They're used in so many different, and I know that our dog sensed the earthquake coming, and other dogs did too before the earthquake. So that kind of extra human sensory kind of perceptions. And now they're sniffing out cancers, apparently, the different types I just learned. But I think it's beautiful, your initial question, why would the rabbis choose it? Why not? I think it's one of the most beautiful accolades to the Israelites that can be found. And interestingly, it's found from someone who started out potentially going to curse them, and then also being dissuaded from that by God. So it's a kind of love poem in a way, I think, not only from Balaam, but from God as well. I just think, why not? I think that's a great, how beautiful you are by Israelites. So
Yeah, great. I agree with you. Any other thoughts on this Ma Tovu prayer? Yeah, so it to me, it's as was mentioned, just this wonderful way of being reminded of the beauty of what it means to be a part of the Jewish people, right? Technically, the rabbis have keyed in on this idea of the dwelling places and the tents being our gathering places, our sanctuaries, our synagogues. And so we're supposed to be reminded of the importance of being in that space. I think it goes even further, the importance of being connected to community, right? That you're saying this when you enter a space of communal responsibility and opportunity, that instead of isolating ourselves more and more, we find beauty in that connection and the importance of that connection. And our tradition has thrived as a result, right? The blessing is that Bilam looks out at this Jewish people and sees a group of people who are sticking together despite their challenges and their fetching as they go through the desert, right? They are willing to go on a path towards the promised land, to a place of success of joy, of opportunity, of a value system that they want to implement in a land that will bring about more justice and peace for all of its inhabitants, right? So that if every time we were to enter the sanctuary, we are to be reminded and inspired to be a part of that community and to then leave the sanctuary afterwards and to try and build that promised land. I think that's a valuable blessing for us to have every single morning that we enter into prayer. Okay, we're gonna stop there. Let me just add I realized I forgot to put in the chat the sheet. So I'm gonna add that now in case you want to go and continue on. I did include at the end here the story of Pinchas. I recommend you read it if you want to tune into Torah study next week, because the story of Pinchas is really part of it. The beginning is in this week's Torah portion, and then next week's Torah portion is really the continuation. So Pinchas is a zealot for the Jewish people. He does an act of violence in order to support what God is asking of the Jewish people. And next week you'll find out what reward or punishment he receives as a result of his actions. So you can go ahead and read that, and then you will learn more about it next week. And then I am going to be back doing Torah study the week after that on the 29th. So hopefully I will see some of you then, and wishing you all a Shabbat Shalom, and thanks for all of your insights and for joining today.
Shabbat Shalom. Thank you.
Shalom. Thank you.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbos, everybody. Bye-bye.
Shabbos.
Shabbos to all.
Shalom.